Welcome to Sinister Heroes. I'm your host, Danny Iniquitous. Thank you for tuning in. Today's episode, we're going to talk about the Graviturgy Wizard. If you like what we do here, please like, share, subscribe. Please keep commenting. We'd love to hear about some awesome, scary builds you've did, some evil characters you've played, or some creative things that you did and how it worked out. Absolutely love to hear from you guys. Please keep it up. Without further ado, let's jump right into the video. The Graviturgy Wizard comes to us from Explorer's Guide to Wildmount. It is a critical role D&D mashup from the mind of Matt Mercer and some of the other creative people in D&D. It's a great book if you ever wanted to look at a lot of cool things. Before they put out Fizbanstresureyofdragons, this really gave a big increase into the viability of the Dragonborn, which was very, very cool, as Matt Mercer tends to use them in a very unique way. It really reflected that. A few things about this book particularly is they added a bunch of new spells to fit the Chronology Wizard and the Graviturgy Wizard. Now, the Graviturgy Wizard really has a lot to do with density and actual gravity and the force and pull of things. So, like, a lot of the spells that you would use that are selectable do have that kind of a feel to it. It's a very spacey kind of feel, like a black hole kind of a moment. So it's very interesting if you think about it in the grand scheme of things that way. So it's a very knowledgeable, spacey kind of a wizard, just based on the subclass. So there's a lot of things to get into, but with the critical role subclasses, a lot of them tend to be very interesting and very complex. And at first look, sometimes they don't look that great. Sometimes they don't feel that great. But you really got to give it a chance. And really, the more creative you are, the more impressive this class can be, specifically with some of these abilities that you get. So take some time. If you're really considering playing this class, don't get overwhelmed by how it looks, but really try and use that big wizard brain of yours to come up with creative ways to use these spells and these abilities, because that is what's going to make this subclass soar. At second level, when you pick this subclass, you get the first Graviturgy Wizard ability, Adjust Density. The text reads as follows. As an action, you can magically alter the weight of one object or creature you can see within 30 feet of you. The object or creature must be large or smaller. The target's weight is halved or doubled for up to a minute, or until your concentration ends, as if you were concentrating on a spell. While the weight of a creature is halved by this effect, the creature's speed increases by 10 feet, it can jump twice as far as normal, and it has disadvantage on strength checks and strength saving throws. While the creature's weight is doubled by this effect, the creature's speed is reduced by 10 feet, and it has advantage on strength checks and strength saving throws. And upon reaching 10th level in this class, you can target a creature that is huge or smaller. So understand a few things about this right off the bat. First off, it's going to take your concentration. As a wizard, that is a very valuable commodity. So you really have to weigh what this actually does with your character. Now, if you have the weight of one of your own, say your party members, because you can use this on anyone. It doesn't say anything outside of it needing to be a creature. It can jump twice as far. It does have disadvantage on strength checks and saving throws, but it can jump twice as far and has a 10-foot increase in movement speed. It can be valuable. Understand that this is not necessarily just a combat ability. You can use this in adventuring if you need to get someplace that you normally couldn't. You need to climb something. There is no limit to how many times you can use this. You just can't use it while you're concentrating on something else. Doubling the weight of a creature, depending on how your characters and how your party is built, this can be actually pretty viable. If you end up having to deal with a creature and you double its weight, you can kite it by staying outside of its movement speed. It's a little difficult, it's a little cheesy, but if all of your players are ranged, if your tank went down and all of you are light armored, squishy kind of characters, this could be very valuable for that. Granted, having spells, there's probably a million things you're thinking of, but understand that you can use this thing creatively. You can wait for, say, a test of strength between another character and adjust the density so that way they can have advantage and overcome things that they normally couldn't. You got to move something, you got to open a door, you got to use strength for whatever it is, and you don't have a barbarian, this compensates for that. This is a very good utility ability by adding buffs so that we have advantage on things. The saving throw strength really doesn't come up very often, but in a situation where you do have it, maybe this might work out, but you really got to gauge what you're doing with your character in order to encompass using these spells and abilities that way. An interesting thing to understand is you can do the same thing for an object. So, armor is an object. What do you do if your chest armor just happens to weigh double what it did before? If you're wearing plate that weighs like about 60 pounds, you're now rocking out at 120 pounds on your chest. How that affects gameplay is something you definitely need to talk to your DM. If that's a situation where your DM can actively include that for a little bit of realism of what that affects and what that does, I think it's pretty reasonable to infer disadvantage. It makes sense because your armor is double its capacity. You're using a one-handed sword, yeah, it weighs like 5-10 pounds maybe, but now it weighs 20. Like, that should be harder for you to swing effectively. Maybe you might have to drop it and use it two-handed to divert that disadvantage or to compensate for it. But I think it's really reasonable to talk some of these things out, especially when it comes to using this in a creative manner. Again, if you're smart and you can convince your DM to do cool things, this can do a lot for you. What do you do when there's a satchel full of gold and you just double the weight of gold inside? It's probably going to break and it's probably going to hit the ground, which can cause confusion. What do you do when people are bringing something in and out and something just gets significantly lighter or significantly heavier? It causes distraction. It makes things very different. Using this is something you would have to use constantly to really get a good feel for it and really implement that into what your character can do. At 6th level, you gain access to Gravity Well. This is another very complicated ability, but sometimes it looks harder than it actually is. It reads as follows. Whenever you cast a spell on a creature, you can move the target 5 feet to an unoccupied space of your choice. If the target is willing to move, the spell hits with an attack, or it fails a saving throw against the spell. Now, it does say target, so these are your single target abilities. It does say if the target is willing to move. That means it has to be either willing to move or hit with an attack, or if it fails a saving throw. So you can cast Message, and since it's willing to move, it hits that criteria, so you can use a cantrip to free somebody from a grapple, or free from somebody from like an entangle or something that's restrained them, because you're shunting them 5 feet because of it. It's very interesting when you start bringing things like that together. If you make an attack, if it fails a saving throw, so say you shoot them with like Disintegrate or Finger of Death or something, that's one person that you can target, one creature, you can push them back 5 feet. 5 feet doesn't seem like a lot, but you are a wizard. You should have concentration spells up and running. Almost every combat encounter, you can put up Evard's Black Tentacle and have them just like sitting right in a choke area. So when anything comes through, you hit it with something and it pushes it right back into that area. And now it has to make that saving throw again. Or next round it has to make that saving throw. And it could be restrained. It's a great way to set up things that you can kind of combo your opponent almost. And be very dastardly about this. There's something beautiful about a wall of fire cutting people off. And once they've walked all the way through, you're just waiting there with another like firebolt to hit them and push them right back another amount of feet. Push them right through that flaming wall again. And they have to deal with that on top of what they've gone through. It's maniacal. You can do cool things. If you build choke points around, if you work with other spellcasters, you can really set up very intricate things where these kinds of effects could work. If you have a warlock in your party and they have the invocation to cause the Eldritch Blast to push someone back 10 feet, you can now combine efforts and push them back 15. And now you're making a big difference. Working with your party is something that you really should be very intelligent about, considering you're a wizard, and being smart is something that's very advantageous to you. And that should really reflect in all aspects. This really sets up this great theme of forcing things to either move slowly or pushing them around, so that way they start to lose the ability to manipulate their ways to get to you. It really enhances what you can do as a wizard, because you have such an incredible spell list that you can really use spells that really reflect that. And really look at spells that you wouldn't normally use. Don't get me wrong, yeah, you're gonna take Fireball, but start looking at other things that push you away, or that push them away, and start really understanding what that means. You know, like when you have something like fear going and everything runs away from you, understand what that could mean for another party member. Start breaking the habit of looking for best spells for a class and start forcing yourself to really pick spells that can really benefit the subclass as opposed to the overall class. At 10th level, you gain access to Violent Attraction. When another creature that you can see within 60 feet of you hits with an attack, a weapon attack, you can use your reaction to increase the velocity of the attack, which causes the target to take an additional 1d10 damage of the weapon's damage type. Alternatively, if you see a creature within 60 feet of you take fall damage, you can use your reaction to increase the fall's damage by 2d10. Very few and far between are the circumstances where you deal with flying enemies. In the circumstance that you do, and they do not have hover, Violent Attraction will be a good way to increase the damage that they take. Plus, it's just going to feel good. It's really hard to put enemies into the air, so understand that not being the predominant use of this ability. The first ability that you can use it with the weapon attack damage, understand that you're increasing the weapon's velocity, so it's part of the attack. So if it's a critical strike, that's part of the weapon damage. So say it's a 2d6, you now add on a 1d10 or 2d10 really to that damage. So all your paladins, your rogues, anything that's hitting really hard, you add that on. That's a great boon to their damage. That becomes 2d10 when they crit. It's fantastic. It's a huge amount of damage. It's a great way to work with your party, and it's gonna feel great when you start melting away enemies, because you know how hard a rogue will hit or how hard a paladin will smite. It's a very great benefit. Again, if you can find a way to get your enemies to fly, that can be a great benefit. If you can somehow get the DM to let you use this ability with levitate or something like that, this can make that happen. You can really create a great scenario. Or maybe you're fighting with a ledge and there's like a balcony or something, and you might be able to just do thunder wave, knock them off the ledge and watch them plummet, and boom, pick up that extra 2d10. That's a nice advantage. That's a nice big bonus to your damage, and it's added on. It can't be taken away. You just have to say, I'll use my reaction, and I'm going to use one of my intelligence modifiers to do so. So you get 5 times to use it a day. Use it. Don't sit on it. Don't wait too long, because the more damage you do, the faster, the less damage you guys take. And that's really something very important that people tend to forget. So Violent Attraction, always keep that in your mind and get used to remembering when other people can crit, especially if they have bigger crit ranges. At 14th level, you gain access to Event Horizon. As an action, you can magically emit a powerful field of gravitational energy that tugs at other creatures for up to a minute, or until your concentration ends, as if you were concentrating on a spell. For the duration, whenever a creature hostile to you starts its turn within 30 feet of you, it must make a strength saving throw against your spell save DC. On a failed save, it takes 2d10 force damage, and its speed is reduced to 0 until the start of its next turn. On a successful save, it takes half as much damage, and every foot of movement costs 2 extra feet of movement. So if you wanted to move 1 foot of movement, it took you 3 feet to do that. So 5 would be 10 feet just to move that 1 box over. Once you use this feature, you can't use it again until you use a long rest or expend a spell slot of 3rd level or higher on it. This is actually a very interesting ability. Now, it's on, and if you can reduce the enemy movement speed to 0, that means its flying speed is moved to 0, so it cannot escape wherever it is. Working in tandem with your party, this can be very effective. Making sure they're caught in something like insect swarm or something like that, or a big AoE or wall of fire, and then having Event Horizon going on simultaneously will cause a great damage scenario for your opponents. It's harder for them to move to you anyway. For them to move 15 feet closer to you is going to cost them 30 feet of movement. It is a lot. It is, actually, it might even end up being more than 30 feet. I am terrible at math, so do not count that on me. But that movement speed racks up very, very quickly. And it's very diminishing. And after that turn, you can move further away. You can move to that point where you're still 30 feet from it, so it has to make that saving throw and still suffer those effects and still play very, very smart. This is really what defines the Graviturgy Wizard. Yeah, there's a couple of spells that are great, like Pulse Wave, that you get specifically for being able to be this kind of wizard. And Pulse Wave just pushes everything back 15 feet, and it does damage, or it pulls everything closer to you. It's up to you, which is a great ability because you can move things forward and back. And if you have abilities like this, bang them back 15 feet, clear yourself away from being out of, opportunity strike range, and you're good. You can still have this going and move out of the way safely. But you're manipulating the circumstances of the world around you, causing, I love the idea of something walking towards you and it just being pulled down to the ground. I love the idea of a just density where something comes close to you and, its chest armor just, it plummets. I love the theology behind that. I don't know if necessarily the abilities are strong enough to affect that, but Event Horizon is definitely one of those things where if you're not looking to burn a spell slot, throw it out there. Throw it out there and see how great it is to debilitate that huge range of area and make it so hard for enemies to come close to you. As a wizard, that's a huge benefit to you because it's so difficult for things to come touch you. It's so difficult for them to just jump next to you and attack you because this destroys their movement speed. And they have to take additional damage. And that force damage is very rarely resisted. And that adds up. That's every turn for a minute. It's great. There's, 10 turns to a minute. So you end up doing 20 d10 if you last the full minute, which is pretty impressive. Or worst case scenario, you do 10 d10. All you have to do is survive at 14th level, not counting what damage you're doing normally with your regular attack. Our final thoughts! The Graviturgy Wizard is a very interesting concept. As I mentioned just before, I really love the idea of something coming towards you and you just start reaching out your hand and it's just being like the screen shaking and it just being brought to its knees as it's trying to reach towards you, but it just physically can't because it cannot sustain the weight and the pressure around you. I think it's very cool thematically. I love the idea behind it, but the subclass doesn't deal the damage on its own that it does to make it real scary and real dark. But the actual spells you get for the subclass, which is something I really didn't go over because I really don't tend to do spells a lot because I like the spells that I like and no one's going to tell me different, but you really got to look at your spell list as a wizard, and I can't tell you enough to really make your spells reflect your class and your subclass. The spells you get specifically for Explorer's Guide to Wildmount, the gravity spells, the densities, the dark star, all those spells, they are very, very cool. And if you really build those abilities and focus those as your spells, as opposed to picking Fireball and Misty Step and Wall of Fire or Enlarge Reduce or Polymorph every single time you play a wizard, and you really start to deviate from that and start picking the unpicked spells, really get a familiar, fly it out there, drop Bestow Curse on something, use those touch abilities that you never really do and start breaking the mold and being scary, you can really do something fun. You can really be a wizard that you don't ever normally see. I like the idea of a wizard being high mobility and just flying and jumping around. That's cool to me. I like the idea of making the world around you so heavily dense that you're the only one that's able to move freely around you. I love that ability. I like the ideas of a lot of the gravity spells. They're all focusing on pulling everything towards one point. And you need that in this subclass. So really taking those spells and using those for your damage sources is really going to make this cool. And it is terrifying to see a whole bunch of things shunted towards the middle and fighting for their lives so they don't get disintegrated or destroyed, which all these spells do at higher levels. Look at Darkstar. Look at Pulse Wave. There's a couple of other ones that are really great. Really get into them and understand that that is what makes this subclass cool. Those additional spells that are done specifically for this in the Chronology Mage, those are great spells, and that's what defines this class, not these abilities. These abilities are okay, they work really well, some of them are great for helping out your teammates and really dominating the field, but if you wanted to be that dark cloaked figure that's like causing things to scramble to get out of this small focus of darkening mass that's pulling everything towards it while they're not able to lift their own weapons to attack you, you know, like, I love that ability. Something actually I wanted to mention with adjustable density. I think it's pretty reasonable if you make a weapon insanely light and they go to swing it, it can fly out of their hands. I'd like that idea of making a strength check in order to make that happen. I think it's great. But it's a cool thing that you can add on. Again, this is one of those things where being creative is going to really benefit you. If you can use smart, intelligent ways to do this, you will break a lot of scenarios that your DM is probably not prepared for, which is probably pretty bad, but it can be very effective for you. The smarter you are with subclasses like these, the better off you are. I refuse to think something's bad without an absolute fight. But I like this, and people like this subclasses. But again, this is going to be something that's what's going to draw you to it is the spells. And you you shouldn't have access to these spells if you're not those kinds of wizards. But that is something very special and very exciting, and I love the idea of watching my enemies just being pulled together and they're screaming and clawing to get away because they're restrained, and everything they have is annihilated. There are no more. There is nothing left. That is beautiful. I love that theme, that ability. And yeah, it's a high level spell, and a lot of times you don't ever get up there, and I know, and it's heartbreaking, but building to that, knowing that's something that I can do at some point, that drives me to play this. That makes me want to be that dark graviturgy wizard that's not highly practiced. That's magic that nobody uses, nobody understands because it's bizarre and difficult. And that's where I thrive. So that's what I enjoy. I really like that. Definitely look through all those spells. And thank you so much for sticking through to the video up until this point. Really appreciate it. Thank you all so much. Please keep commenting. We'd love to hear from you guys. I've been really busy lately, so I haven't gotten back to everyone that I wanted to as quickly as I normally do, and I apologize for that. But thank you so much for giving a Spooky Kid a chance.